The polished wood of the courtroom benches felt cold and unyielding, a perfect match for the atmosphere my children had created. Across the room, my son, Mark, whispered something to my daughter, Chloe, and they both shared a smug little smile before rolling their eyes in my direction. They saw their old man, dressed in a simple tweed jacket, looking lost and out of place. To them, I was a relic, a doddering fool who needed to be managed, whose modest assets needed to be protected from his own senility. Their lawyer, a sharp-suited man with a predatory grin, oozed a confidence that was almost suffocating. He saw an easy win, a simple case of proving an elderly man was no longer competent to manage his own affairs. They all saw what I had allowed them to see for 40 years, a simple, hard-working man of simple means. They thought this was a formality, a legal rubber stamp on a coup they had already executed in their own minds. My heart, which I thought had been shattered into a million pieces months ago, felt a familiar, dull ache. But beneath the ache, something else had taken root, something cold, hard, and patient. I had spent a lifetime building things in silence, and I had spent the last 6 months building this moment. The bailiff called the case, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Conservatorship hearing for Mr. Alistair Peterson. Petitioners Mark and Chloe Peterson. I watched as their lawyer arranged his files, a theatrical display of preparedness. My own counsel, a public defender they probably assumed I could barely afford, gave me a nervous glance. I offered him a calm, reassuring nod. He had his instructions, simple as they were, to let me speak when the time came. The judge, a stern-looking man in his late 50s named Judge Miller, peered down from his bench over a pair of reading glasses. "Mr. Peterson, would you please approach?" he asked, his tone neutral, bored even. I stood up, my joints creaking just enough to sell the part, and walked slowly toward the front. Mark sighed audibly, a performance of long-suffering patience for the court. Chloe examined her nails. This was all just a tedious hurdle before they could get their hands on my house and my savings. As I reached the respondent's table and turned to face the judge, I saw his eyes scan the file in front of him, then lift to look at me properly for the first time. His expression shifted. The boredom evaporated, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition. His posture straightened. He took off his glasses and leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in disbelief. "Mr. Peterson?" he said, his voice suddenly stripped of its judicial monotone. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of a thunderclap in the silent room. "Alistair Peterson, of the Peterson Logistics Group?" My children froze. Mark's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. Chloe looked up from her nails, her brow furrowed in utter confusion. Their lawyer's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with alarm. They didn't know that name. To them, I was just Dad, the retired trucking manager. The room held its breath, and in that perfect, beautiful silence, I knew my plan had worked. It all started on my 65th birthday. It should have been a quiet celebration, a milestone. My wife, Eleanor, had been gone for 2 years, and the silence in our home was a constant companion. I had wanted nothing more than a simple dinner with my children, perhaps sharing a bottle of wine and stories about their mother. That was my mistake, assuming they still valued the simple things. They arrived an hour late, not with a cake or a thoughtful gift, but with an agenda. They brought their partners, who stood awkwardly in the background, as Mark and Chloe sat me down in my own living room, the one Eleanor had so lovingly decorated, and presented me with a glossy brochure for a luxury retirement community. "Dad," Chloe began, her voice dripping with that cloying, false sweetness she used when she wanted something. We've been worried about you. This big old house. It's too much for you to manage alone." Mark nodded eagerly, picking up the thread. "The upkeep alone must be a fortune, and the property taxes. We've been thinking, it's time to be practical. We found a realtor. The market is incredible right now. The land value is through the roof." I stared at them, the brochure for Golden Vistas resting on the coffee table between us. I had built this house with my own hands, alongside my father, brick by brick. Every corner held a memory of Eleanor, of raising them from rambunctious toddlers to the polished, ungrateful adults sitting before me. "You want me to sell my home," I said, my voice flat. "It's not just about you, Dad," Chloe said, the sweetness already starting to curdle. "It's about our future, too. An early inheritance would really help us out. Mark needs a bigger place for his family, and my husband and I are trying to get our startup off the ground." She gestured vaguely, as if her vague entrepreneurial dream was a matter of national importance. The final, sharpest twist of the knife came when she added, with a dismissive wave at the walls around us, "Besides, this place is so dated. We'd probably just tear it down. Imagine a beautiful modern home here instead. Tearing it down. Tearing down Eleanor's memory, her garden, the pencil marks on the doorframe where we measured their height each year. In that moment, something inside me broke. The grief I had carried for my wife, the endless patience I had shown my children, the gentle kindness they had mistaken for weakness for their entire lives, it all shattered and reformed into something else, something cold and resolute. I looked at their eager, greedy faces, and I saw strangers. They weren't mourning their mother's home. They were calculating its square footage. They weren't concerned for their father's well-being. They were liquidating his life for their convenience. I stood up slowly. "No," I said. Just that one word. The shock on their faces was almost comical. They were so used to me acquiescing, to me being the endlessly flowing font of support and cash. "No?" Mark sputtered. "Dad, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," I replied, my voice devoid of the warmth they had always taken for granted. "This is my house. The discussion is over." They left in a storm of indignation, hurling accusations of selfishness, of being stuck in the past, of not caring about their happiness. The front door slammed shut, and the silence that returned was different. It wasn't lonely anymore. It was clear. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, a glass of whiskey in my hand, and looked at the photo of Eleanor on my desk. I told her I was sorry. Sorry I had let our children become this. Sorry I had shielded them so much from reality that they had no concept of it. And I made a promise. I promised her I would teach them a lesson they would never forget. Not out of anger, but out of a painful, necessary love. The next morning I called Arthur Vance. Arthur had been my corporate lawyer and closest confidant for 30 years. No one, not even my children, knew he existed. To them, my legal affairs were handled by a local guy who did wills and property deeds. "Alistair," he said, his voice warm, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Arthur," I said calmly, "it's time to liquidate the dad account. We're restructuring." My children had no idea that their entire lifestyle was a carefully constructed facade maintained by me. I never wanted them to be rich kids. I wanted them to learn the value of work. So I presented myself as a mid-level manager at a large trucking company. It wasn't a lie, precisely. I did manage it because I owned the entire multi-billion-dollar logistics empire. Peterson Logistics Group wasn't just a name on a few trucks they might have seen on the highway. It was a global behemoth with assets and subsidiaries they couldn't possibly imagine. Their lives, however, were funded by a series of separate, deliberately firewalled accounts. The monthly allowances they received weren't from a modest pension. They were direct deposits from a holding company I controlled. The down payment on Mark's ridiculously oversized house in the suburbs, a gift from an anonymous trust I had set up, the seed money for Chloe's perpetually failing startups, the same. The luxury cars they drove were leased by one of my subsidiary corporations. The credit cards in their wallets were tied to a corporate account. They believed they were successful, self-made people who just got a little help from their dear old dad. They had no idea they were fish swimming in a bowl that I owned, filled with water that I provided. It was time to drain the bowl. The first step was methodical and silent. I had Arthur draft the orders. The first call was to the bank that managed the monthly deposits. I instructed them to cease all payments, effective immediately. The second was to the corporate leasing department. Terminate the leases for a Mercedes G-Wagon registered to Mark Peterson and a Range Rover registered to Chloe Peterson. Arrange for repossession within 48 hours. The third was to the credit card company. Cancel all secondary cards linked to account number 7745. Yes, all of them, immediately. The final, most complex step involved their homes. I had co-signed their mortgages, a fact they'd conveniently forgotten. I had also been making supplementary gift payments to their mortgage lenders each month to cover the shortfalls their own incomes couldn't handle. I instructed my family office to stop those payments. The banks would soon be sending letters, then warnings, then foreclosure notices. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. I imagined this was a period of confusion for them. A missed payment here, a declined card there, annoyances they would blame on a bank error or my own supposed incompetence. Then the storm broke. It started with a text from Chloe. "Dad, my card was declined at Whole Foods. So embarrassing. Did you forget to pay the bill?" I read the message and set my phone down. I did not reply. 2 days later, a frantic call from Mark. I let it go to voicemail. "Dad, where are you? A tow truck just took my car from my office parking lot. They said the lease was terminated. This has to be a mistake. Call me back. This is a nightmare." His voice was a cocktail of panic and indignation. The calls and texts escalated. They became a deluge of confusion, then anger, then outright threats. They accused me of losing my mind, of being spiteful. They couldn't connect the dots because their worldview was too small. In their minds, I was a simple old man with a simple life. The idea that I could orchestrate something like this was beyond their comprehension. It had to be senility. It had to be a mistake. Their desperation was their undoing. It led them exactly where I knew it would, to a lawyer's office. They found a man who saw 2 well-dressed, seemingly successful children concerned for their aging father's erratic behavior and his modest estate. Primarily the house they coveted. It was the perfect narrative. Their lawyer filed for an emergency conservatorship, citing my recent erratic financial behavior and my refusal to communicate as clear evidence of my mental decline. They were so blinded by their arrogance that they delivered me the perfect stage for my final act, a court of law. And so we found ourselves in that courtroom. Judge Miller was still staring at me, a silent question in his eyes. The name Peterson Logistics Group hung in the air, a bomb that had detonated without a sound. "Your Honor," their lawyer finally stammered, shuffling his papers as if the answer was written on them. I believe there must be some mistake. My client's father is Alistair Peterson, a retired manager from—" "I know who he is," the judge cut him off, his voice now sharp and authoritative. He turned his gaze to my children. "Your father's foundation, The Eleanor Peterson Fund provided the seed money for the inner-city legal aid clinic where I got my start 30 years ago. He put himself through night school while working 60-hour weeks to build his company from a single rusty truck into one of the largest privately owned logistics firms in the world. And you are here today claiming he is incapable of managing his own finances? The color drained from Mark and Chloe's faces. They looked at me as if they were seeing me for the first time. The simple tweed jacket, the gentle demeanor, it all looked like a costume now. My public defender stood, cleared his throat, and said the only words I had instructed him to say. "Your Honor, Mr. Peterson would like to call a witness, Mr. Arthur Vance." Arthur, who had been sitting quietly in the back row, stood up. He was the opposite of their flashy lawyer. He was 70, with a quiet dignity and a presence that commanded respect. He carried a single, thick leather briefcase. As he walked to the front, the other lawyer looked like a child caught playing dress-up. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "It's been a long time." "Indeed, Your Honor," Arthur said. "I am here today not as a witness, but as Mr. Peterson's primary legal counsel for the past 35 years, and I have a few documents I believe will clarify the situation for the court." Arthur didn't address my competence. He didn't need to. Instead, he systematically and calmly dismantled my children's entire reality. He started with the small things. He produced a copy of the credit card agreement showing the cards were corporate liabilities and the cancellation order signed by me, the account's primary holder. He produced the vehicle lease agreements, again in a corporate name, and the repossession orders, again authorized by me. Their lawyer objected feebly. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The issue is Mr. Peterson's current mental state." "On the contrary," Judge Miller interjected, his eyes fixed on Arthur, "I find this highly relevant. Please continue, Mr. Vance." Arthur then moved on to the houses. He presented the mortgage documents, highlighting the cosigner clause. Then he showed the bank statements from a trust account, detailing years of supplementary payments made on their behalf, followed by the final, signed order to cease those payments. "My client's father was helping them," their lawyer protested weakly. "This proves nothing." "It proves," Arthur said, his voice like ice, "that Mr. Peterson was not merely helping. He was, in fact, the sole financial pillar upon which his children's extravagant lifestyles were built. A pillar which he, in his full and legally sound mind, chose to remove." Mark was white as a sheet. Chloe was visibly trembling, staring at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. But Arthur wasn't finished. This was the crescendo I had been waiting for. He placed a thick, bound portfolio on the clerk's desk. "Your Honor, the petitioners have based their entire claim on the assumption that their father's estate is modest and that his recent actions have put it at risk. They have valued his primary asset, his home, at approximately $2 million. He paused, letting the number hang in the air. "This document is a full, audited accounting of Mr. Alastair Peterson's personal and corporate assets. The Peterson Logistics Group, of which he is the founder and 100% shareholder, was privately valued last quarter at an estimated $1.8 billion. His personal investment portfolio, managed by my office, currently stands at just over $400 million. The charitable foundation he established in his wife's name is endowed with another $200 million. A collective gasp went through the small public gallery. My children's lawyer swayed on his feet, his jaw hanging open. He had brought a knife to a nuclear war. Mark made a small, choked sound. Chloe looked like she was going to be sick. The $2 million house they wanted to tear down was, to me, little more than a rounding error. It was my home, and its value was purely sentimental. The petitioners, Arthur concluded, his voice ringing with finality, are not here to protect their father. They are here because the allowance he so generously provided them was, for the first time in their lives, cut off. Their claim has no merit. It is a frivolous, vindictive, and deeply insulting action. We ask for a summary dismissal with prejudice. The judge looked at the portfolio, then back at my children. The sternness in his eyes had been replaced by a profound and undisguised contempt. "This court," he said, his voice booming, "is not a tool to be used by greedy children to bully their parents. I have rarely seen such a disgusting display of ingratitude and entitlement." He turned to Mark and Chloe, who both flinched as if struck. "You came here to declare your father incompetent, the man who gave you everything, who built an empire with his bare hands and his mind, the mind you now seek to have declared unsound. You have not only failed, you have exposed your own profound moral and ethical bankruptcy to the world." He banged his gavel with a deafening crack. "Case dismissed with prejudice. I am also awarding Mr. Peterson full recovery of his legal fees, and I suggest you two find a way to apologize to your father, though frankly I doubt you're capable of understanding the debt you owe him." Silence. Utter, crushing silence. Their lawyer gathered his papers with trembling hands, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Mark and Chloe were statues, frozen in their chairs, their faces a mask of public humiliation and private horror. And for the first time, I spoke. I didn't address the judge. I looked directly at my son and my daughter. "The money was never the point," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the room. "I kept it from you because I wanted you to be good people. I wanted you to learn humility, the value of a dollar earned, the importance of character over comfort. I wanted you to be more like your mother." I let my words sink in, watching the flicker of understanding, of shame, finally dawn in their eyes. "But you learned nothing. You mistook my kindness for weakness and my generosity for an obligation. Your mother's house, our home, was just land value to you. I was just an obstacle between you and a payout. So yes, I cut you off, not out of spite, and not because I'm losing my mind. I did it because actions have consequences. This is your consequence. Welcome to the real world. I hope you find your way." I turned without another word and walked out of the courtroom, leaving them to drown in the wreckage of the world they had built on a foundation of lies they never even knew existed. The aftermath was predictable. Their lives imploded. Without my support, the foreclosures were finalized. Their sham businesses folded. They had to sell off their designer clothes and expensive furniture just to pay their lawyers and their debts. Mark, who had always boasted about his management job, a position I had quietly created for him at one of my subsidiaries, was let go for non-performance. He was last I heard working in the warehouse of a competitor, a real warehouse, with real work. Chloe and her husband split up under the financial strain. She was living on a friend's couch, her dreams of being a tech mogul replaced by the reality of finding a job that could pay her rent. They tried to contact me, of course. First came the angry, entitled voicemails. Then, as their situation grew more desperate, came the tearful, pleading messages. They were sorry. They understood now. They loved me. I listened to them, but I didn't reply for a long, long time. The lesson wasn't finished until they truly understood what they had lost, and it wasn't the money. I live a quiet life now, still in the house Eleanor and I built. I spend my days managing the foundation, funding projects that help people who, unlike my children, have never had a safety net. The peace I feel is profound. It's not the triumphant joy of victory, but the quiet satisfaction of a necessary, painful duty performed. I had to destroy the family I had in order to save the children I love. Perhaps one day, when they have truly learned humility and gratitude, they can begin to earn their way back into my life. Not my wallet, but my life. Until then, they have the greatest gift I could ever give them, the opportunity to build something of their own for themselves. A lesson in consequences is a harsh lesson, but sometimes it's the only one that matters.